So this is a story about how I was in a group therapy cult, and also my adventure with SSRI medication Lexapro. So I had a lot of social intelligence and just verbal issues due to Asperger's or autism, like something neurodivergent, maybe ADHD too, maybe personality disorder like borderline personality disorder or narcissistic attachment issues. And so naturally in my early 20s, I wanted to have friends and date and just grow as a person and socialize and learn to have a job, career, and so on. And I went to the campus health center and talked to a therapist, and she said she recommends that I join group therapy. It should be co-ed with men and women, because I didn't talk to girls at school, because I went to a religious school where girls and boys were separated, and there was like a lot of fear mongering, like don't talk to girls, they'll make fun of you or whatever. Anyway, the school I went to in my elementary school had this ancient philosophy that girls and boys should be separated. It's easier to teach them. Just keep them separate. They didn't really consider the social problems that might result. But anyway, so I went on the list, and there was a guy who was downtown, prime location, central location, expensive office, and had a fancy name that like rolled off your tongue, looked and sounded very trustworthy. It had a PhD, and also it said CGP, certified group practitioner, some group therapist basically. So I went in, and it was one of the many things I was trying to improve myself socially. I had a cognitive behavior therapist for negative thinking, like for negative thinking, pessimism. I was trying to kind of undo it. And he helped. The CBT guy helped me graduate, helped me even get a job. So I found the CBT guy effective, but then I kind of got lazy, didn't want to go to him anymore. And it didn't seem effective eventually. I was thinking maybe I'm just wasting my time going to him. So I found this group therapist from a list. It was like official list of official licensed group therapy groups. There were about 10 in the city, surrounding cities, and I just chose this one that was actually close to me near my house, and it sounded very legit. But it was one of different things I was doing. I took an acting class, I took some dance lessons. I discovered I could actually follow a rhythm and sort of dance. And I went to like ballet shows, modern dance shows, just different events. Played billiards at a bar, went to a dive bar, listened to shows, just tried to talk to people, like young people at dive bars. Went on a couple of online dates with mixed success. Went to see some bands at the bars with the girls from the online dates. And then I didn't find this group therapist, to be very good and effective. He seemed like kind of average, like not very somewhat helpful, not very like questionable. Because the thing I came in is because I was bullied at school, and I came in with this whole like the weight of the bullying, the emotional weight, And he told me stuff, like I mentioned stuff that I did like socially wrong in school that I was bullied for. Sort of for a reason, you could say, when people do, especially people with autism or neurodivergent people, kids do something inappropriate socially and they get bullied for it, it does send them sort of a correct signal not to do this inappropriate behavior. But it's also like a bad way to do it. Like in a healthy school community, kids would like be polite about it, would just tell you to stop firmly, or they would leave you, and then teachers would like intervene and would take you aside and correct your behavior and say, hey, don't do this, it doesn't look good, it upsets others, it's bad for your reputation socially and stuff. But that's not what happened. I was like mocked and bullied for socially inappropriate behavior, but also I was mistreated at like this school and summer camp by kids who were just kind of exploitative and were just looking to abuse others. And I just lacked the verbal ability to talk back or do anything about it. I mean, I did a couple of times and it actually worked, but I wasn't able to do it all the time. Anyway, so I mentioned to this guy during my first session, and he said, oh, if you see you have like low self-esteem in school as a child, if you were good at an instrument like the flute or the piano, or you were really like good at math, you could get self-esteem from being really good at that subject. Your parents would praise you and you could feel good about yourself, but you weren't. I guess that's why you feel bad. And he also said that there was an incident like where kids, like during a school dance, not like prom, but similar to a prom, like a nightclub for the kids almost, boys would like grope a girl's butt and breasts during a dance, like in a way the girl didn't expect it. Not like groping on purpose, but just like kids were watching a ton of pornography and talking about it, and they just sort of did it without thinking. They didn't do it routinely, but there was just two dances where like boys just like, instead of holding their hands on the girl's bra strap, like in the clavicle area, they would lower their hands to the girl's butt and like have their body too close to the girl's breasts. So it's kind of like first degree groping, and it was like a stupid thing several boys did. They didn't do it again, or maybe they did it like once or maybe 2 or 3 times, but they didn't do it again. It was kind of like nobody was prepared to dance. It was just a confusing situation because like it was like school dance, some girls and boys were grinding, other people just didn't want to dance, they were too shy, and then there were these older counselors who would grab girl counselors, and they would tell them to dance and force them to dance and push them on this dance floor, and the boys never danced and had no idea how to do it. And they would like take boys and girls and pair them up and tell them to dance. It was just really confusing. There was a lot of stress. And then other like counselors in training would come up and then start laughing at the boys who tried it. Anyway, there were like several boys who like the whole summer camp or like the whole school made fun of them. And it was just really complex dynamic, a lot of stress. So anyway, it was kind of a stupid thing. So that's what happened. A couple of boys grabbed girls' butts and rubbed themselves against the girls' breasts during a dance. That's what happened. Nasty, I know. But nobody intervened. There was no education, like what's appropriate dance etiquette. Like it was just, people were just assumed to do it normally. And then they like the neurodivergent boys who couldn't talk very well or just would kind of blabber nonsense, kind of got into that situation. And there were boys who actually like would like sandwich a girl on purpose. Some of the girls were into it, but then they got punished. It was just a really confusing, complex situation. People were setting each other up, like there were like psychopathic kids who would like find out from a girl if she likes a boy, and then go tell that girl that the boy said she doesn't like her because she's fat, and that would make the girl cry for several days in a row. And then they would go tell the adults that, hey, this boy made her cry because she thinks he said she's fat, so now he has to apologize. And this boy never even talked to her. They would call the kids homeless, or like basically everyone neurodivergent was made fun of, and people would set them up. And anyway, so I addressed this to this therapist, and he goes, well, boys and girls at that age are trying to figure out if they like groping girls' butts and breasts. And girls are trying to figure out if they like being groped. So, some of those girls probably enjoyed it. Yes, most likely some of those girls, the girls enjoyed being groped. And it didn't sound right to me at the time. And then now, later, I've thought about more. Well, this therapist said that it's okay to grope girls unexpectedly, not like during a consensual date or like during like a flirtatious, not like at a nightclub where like girls come in and they want to grind on someone, and it's like two people like inching toward each other, or like people trying to find somebody to grind on that the girl would be into it. No, but taking a risk. No, it was like the guy said, essentially, if boys like it, they can commit first-degree sexual assault, and that's fine. Let's just assume the girls enjoy it. No, that's not what happened. It was just a formal dance. Girls in general like dancing. Boys were inexperienced. Nobody taught them, don't be a creepy guy. Let the girl determine the distance. Keep your hands above the girl's butt. Don't let your hands rest on the girl's boobs. Keep your hand on the girl's bar strap. Keep your elbow up. Like, with this type of formal sort of instructions on dance etiquette, culture of consent, this wouldn't have happened. Boys would just hold the form normally, and the girls would have had a great time, slow dancing. And it would actually help boys, create more of a relationship, a friendship with the girls. So yeah, it was just a totally unexpected situation for the girls. They felt embarrassed. They said they felt uncomfortable, but at the time they didn't do anything because nobody told them they can like push a guy away or say no. So an uncomfortable situation. Girls got groped during the dance. Boys were wrong. They kind of did because they were stupid, but also watching a lot of porn, so somewhat guilty. Kind of a disastrous situation, but he said it's not disastrous, it's normal. It's not normal. So he provided bad education. And it's like, why did he do it? And, we discussed it with the group therapy members. And one theory we have is that he was trying to just make you feel good any cost in order to bond you to himself so that you would join his therapy and stay with him. So if you said, you murdered someone in Times Square, he'd say, oh, it's understandable. It's okay. People are trying to figure out, blah, blah, blah. He's just trying to mirror you, maybe. Also, the second technique is mirroring, like NLP and psychopaths. In order to like build trust with the person, in order to control them, they would just mirror whatever you say. So if you said, I like groping girls, he'd say, oh yeah, me too, I like groping girls too, it's fun, or something like that. Or if you said that I like baking cookies, he'd be saying, oh yeah, baking cookies is great, we do it in our family. Or if you say I like skiing, he'd be like, oh, skiing is awesome, I know everything about skiing, I go every month, or something like that. And then he'd be mirror you, and then you'd feel like you relate to him, and you'd also feel like validated. So he like and then the fourth is he would validate, I guess he was validating bad things you said. if you said like, oh, I showed a middle finger to my grandma, he'd be like, oh yeah, that's right, go show her, she deserves it. Just validating bad things, which is for a therapist is unethical. It's providing wrong information, leading you to something wrong. That's the opposite of what a therapist should do. A therapist should correct your behavior based on their education and knowledge. The standard of care, whatever the standard of care is, or even just based on normal life experience. So yeah, just validating, people groping girls and saying like, if you like it, it's normal, and just providing this false information. It's not normal, but he's saying it is for like Freudian reasons, for these twisted, supposedly developmental reasons, and just blending things. Like, you could say it's normal for boys, let's say in kindergarten or something, to pinch girls' hair in order to get a reaction, because sort of boys and girls are exploring. You could say it's common and it's somewhat normal, but it's not really a correct way to interact. It's not respectful, can be harmful. It's kind of like bullying. It's violating another person's boundaries. So while it's sort of normal, there's a better way to interact that's really normal and respectful, and that's just not it. You could say it's like normal to get into a fight in school and give someone a black eye because they teased you. Or you could say, there's a better way to do it that's more normal and more respectful and, more healthy, safe communication. If someone's bullying you, don't engage in a fight, leave, report it, have the person, expelled or something, sent to the office. So anyway, it just didn't seem right. So he did that, told me that groping girls is normal, which it isn't. And then, I told him, I have this difficulty talking to women, because I have difficulty talking to people due to autism. And he goes, well, the women in my group will go crazy over you if you join. And I didn't think it was like really believable, but I had this inkling that maybe it's kind of true. Like, maybe they're just stuck in this therapy group, and having any guy will be really exciting for them. So when I joined, there was only like one girl there, sort of my age, and she had zero interest in me. Like, I could see she just wasn't attracted to me physically and didn't have respect for my personality, developmental level. She wasn't interested in me at all. She wasn't crazy about me. In fact, she ignored me, didn't say hi, didn't really introduce herself, and the whole group kind of ignored me. Maybe they just said like a brief hi in their name, but I came in this group and the group just continued talking about their old conversation as if I wasn't there. They didn't ask me any questions, didn't ask me like why I was there. Well, maybe they did, but very briefly. They just continued with an old conversation and made zero effort to include me, which like in normal society is rude. And this only girl in the group was having a conversation with this hot guy, and you could see like she was into him and he was kind of flirting with her too, but didn't look like he wanted to date her, but it looked like she would date him because he was like a hot American guy. And she was American, but from another country. Her mom was an immigrant. And they were talking about teaching in China, that this girl wants to go do this teaching gig in China for a year. And he was saying he did it and he doesn't really recommend it, but he was being really tactful and like saying he won't make a decision for her. Like, it was kind of an interesting experience, but he won't do it again. He was kind of hinting that she shouldn't do it. And they just had this conversation about China, and I was kind of becoming furious because, I'm looking for therapy. I'm looking for almost like speech language pathology. And I kind of came to practice talking to people and, this therapist promised that women will be crazy over me, and actually they're not. And I said, sorry to interrupt, but it's like, it seems like kind of like I'm wasting my time here because I was promised group therapy, and this is just like a very casual, boring conversation about, the details of going on the China trip. And only 2 people are talking, and it does seem like, this girl is in love with this guy. So like, why don't you just get it over with, And the therapist played this trick. Now I realize he probably trauma bonded me, because he promised me the girls would go crazy over me, and they weren't. And then he kind of guided this girl to get humiliated in the group and to get like put down by the guy she was into, under the guise of group therapy. And then the therapist blamed it on me and made the girl mad at me. This is what the therapist did. As soon as I mentioned that this girl seemed like she was in love with this guy, well, a rational, tactful person as a therapist wouldn't pursue that, because the girl probably, had a feeling the guy wasn't really into her, didn't want to get rejected. So that's why she wasn't asking him out. She's probably like just engaging in a casual conversation. She enjoyed it and see if maybe it got farther, but she didn't want to take a risk because she probably had an idea that the guy wasn't totally into her. So the therapist, instead of like tactfully ignoring the fact that I said she was into him, the subject, he elevated the subject by saying, "Oh, do you want to ask this guy out for coffee on a date?" And so she thought, okay, it's my group therapist, I should do what he say. And she went ahead with it, and she said, yes, wouldn't mind asking this guy, not me, the hot guy, on a date. And the guy said, no, sorry, I don't really want to do it, I don't think it's right, sort of interested like you, but not that much. And afterward, the therapist blamed the whole thing on me. He said, see, you inserted yourself into their relationship, and you did it masterfully. And then afterward, this girl started saying she hates me for some reason. I remind her of her ex-boyfriend, and she wants to bash my head off. And I was like trauma bonded because, I was told there were women who would be into me. Nobody there was into me. There was one girl who was into somebody else. I was kind of stupid enough to bring up the fact that there was like attraction between them. And then now this girl hates me, and I'm being blamed for intruding into their relationship. But isn't that like group therapy? It's not like individual. Like, you come to group therapy and there's just a couple having a private conversation, nobody else is included. Like, anyway, so I was trauma bonding because I was feeling like a thrill, because wow, somebody is angry at me, kind of gave me a thrill, but also made me feel like bad about myself and small. And the therapist said that I'm guilty, that I brought this up on myself. Well, the therapist actually started praising it sort of as a relationship building, that the girl feels something angry towards me, and it's good that she's expressing it. He was really into... The therapist was really into people coming up with feelings toward others, telling them about those feelings. And he would ask the other person, well, do you know that person feels this about you, and how do you react? And he was kind of butting heads for people, creating conflicts, and kind of making people fish for emotions and reactions that weren't there, almost like inducing reactions. Mostly negative. or exaggeratingly positive. So it wasn't true communication, it was just this fake mimicry of relationships where he'd say, well, what do you think about this guy? What do you feel? And you'll be like, oh, I feel angry. And he'd say, oh, does, Joseph, do you know that Joseph feels angry at you? And how does it make you feel? And it seemed like therapy, but it's more like those cults, like the Synanon cult in the 70s. And it's like the attack therapy cults. They were in New York. And like the attack therapy groups, they were done for the troubled teen industry. Anyway, so later on we figured out that this therapist was licensed and well-respected group therapist. He was like covertly, without telling people, running an attack therapy group where he would just instruct people to like attack each other, but did it covertly. He would say, well, say anything you want, and then he'd open what you said for discussion without telling you about it first or asking for your permission. And if somebody had like a strong bad reaction, he would say, go on, that's good. And if someone started bullying you, or like telling you, saying you're a bad person, or they have some strong judgment, or even like one girl showed the person in the group a middle finger, then 2 middle fingers, and the therapist laughed and said, that's great, go show him, started praising her for it. So he would like covertly encourage people to attack a single person and then praise people for being like abusive. And then the person would give feedback and he would say, oh, let's explore it, say more. It all seemed like therapy, but it was fake, unnatural, and it was emotional abuse and trauma bonding. And he kept like upselling the group, saying it's the perfect place. Oh, do you have an issue like with work or anything, or you have some complaints about your life or life goals? Well, the group is the perfect place. Talk to people here. And he would say, oh, talk to people in the group while you're in the group, forget about family and friends. And he would say, oh, you didn't like give money to your mom when she needed it, that's good. Or like your aunt said this and you're gonna give her a birthday present now. Just encourage these like wild, cruel, relationship breaking behaviors within your family. And then he would say that he had fistfights with his dad and it led to personal growth, and then later they were friends, and then some people started like fighting their dad at home and it even got the cops called on them. Some people started having conflicts with their dad, quit their jobs at their dad's company, which wasn't a good decision for them. And this guy would also talk about you in third person, like, well, Joe la la la, or well, Ann this and this. He would comment about you in third person while you're there. He would mock you, he would demean you. And if you criticized him, like people say, like they don't trust him, that he's dishonest, and that he manipulates them, and then he would brag and say, oh yeah, of course I'm manipulative. It's like the whole implication was that he's demeaning people because that's like he's attacking bad things about them, and that makes it like hard work. And he would say like his therapy group is hard work, and that there are support groups that he does sometimes and they're really easy to do because he doesn't have to work in support groups. But in this group he makes people work very hard and does a lot of mental work himself to help people have breakthroughs. And that of course he's manipulative, and that he would say he wants us to he knows something we have to figure out, but he won't tell us because he wants us to figure it out on our own. And when people would complain about him, he just would let you talk and wouldn't really address it. And eventually one person said that, like, look, you tell us to be open and honest and tell people how we feel openly and honestly, but it doesn't look like you are doing the same in the group. And instead of addressing it, like the fact that, he shouldn't be lying, he's manipulating us, and like us being honest just gives them material to manipulate us on. He said to the guy that said it, he started attacking him and saying, that means you have a problem with the group process. See, I have to wrestle with you now. I don't know if I have time for it, but see, you're ungrateful. You and this other guy in group, you are very immature and vulnerable emotionally when you joined, and you don't realize how I took care of your emotions, not to hurt your emotions, like a little gentle flower, and I nurtured you. And he said, well, you have to start attacking the person who criticized him, saying, you have to be an authority in every conversation. Why? And that was as the person was quitting the group. That person actually mentioned the word cults, but then said, I met my group goals. That's why I'm quitting. And we actually had a therapy student in the group for a few weeks, 3 weeks. And the therapy student said, hey, I've seen how you talk in the group. The way you talk is bad. What you're teaching is bad. If this is where you're teaching, I don't want to learn it. This is not how my friends or my family or anyone I know talk. I don't want to learn this. But at first, this therapy student was like in love, like totally taken by this therapist who made him feel like an equal. He was like a 70-year-old guy with a PhD, therapist with 40 years experience. He made this therapy student feel like an equal to him. Like they both had a mutual understanding, like they were both talented. And so the therapist starts attacking this guy by saying, well, why are you here then? Well, he said, well, I'm here because I'm going to be doing my own groups and I wanted to see how it is. And he said, well, see, you're not here as a student. Well, you're just here as an observer. You think you're better than everybody else. And he goes, see, you've made yourself different from the rest of the group. Do you do that with your friends too? And the guy was sort of really smart. I guess he knew about psychopaths, narcissists, or just was a well-regulated childhood person. He just sort of didn't say anything and just sat there and then left. Didn't engage the therapist anymore and didn't come back. Didn't leave an online review either. And then the therapist started saying, this guy is clueless about emotions. He won't be a good therapist. It's scary that this type of clueless person is going into therapy. He has no idea about himself. It may be years of therapy and experience until he figures it out. And actually one of the girls, another autistic girl, but a clever one, in the group started attacking the guy by saying, well, if you are not one of the group members and just sort of observing for your future job, why are you here? But she just sort of followed the therapist's desire or line of thought, what he wanted us to think as a sidekick, which was really common. I did that as well. I would just repeat what he said and elaborate what he said with my own ideas. Because he thought it was therapy. He thought everything he said was sort of right or it had therapeutic value. And also there was fear and coercion to criticize him, to criticize his group, to criticize people in the group. Although he did encourage the emotional verbal abuse, you would say his group is useless or something, or contradict people, and he would imply that what you're doing is really dangerous, because you're like wasting group time and you're interfering with therapy for other members when they need his help for like depression. And eventually I was actually ended up in his group for actually 5 years of weekly sessions, believe it or not. And eventually I just, I said that hey, therapist, you fuck people over and then you heal them and you repeat it as a cycle. And what I meant was that he like breaks people down, demeans them and abuses them, and then he like validates, comforts and promises them things. Just does it over and over, and it creates like this, it's useless, but it creates like this dependence. And instead of like addressing the core content of what I said, he said like, hey John, what is this fuck word you're using? Why use such language? So it's like he changed the subject and like blamed me for my language and just totally ignored my accusation of a problem with him as a person and a therapist. And another time, or maybe it was on the same day, I said that, what you're doing is medically unethical. And, if you study medical ethics, like basic medical ethics, healthcare ethics on Wikipedia, it'll say like consent, informed consent is a principle of medical ethics, and do no harm is a principle of medical ethics. And I said that the fact that he opens the group by saying, well, would anybody like to share anything, talk about anything you want, with a smile, and then he unexpectedly opens it up for group conversation without asking that person for permission for what they said to be discussed, or without warning the person that what they just said will be discussed as a group. That's not informed consent. And then he has the whole group like gang up on one person and take turns like criticizing one person. That seems not right. And people in the group started saying that they agree with me, they had the same thoughts. And then he told me, he listened to me, like giving me space, pretending to. And then he goes, well, John, enough is enough. What is this really about? Like I'm having like delusional or like some sort of incorrect thoughts, and I have some sort of issue that has to be explored. It's not that I'm actually addressing inappropriate, abusive behavior on his part that he needs to stop. He shouldn't be doing in the first place. It's not within the scope of his practice. Therapists in America shouldn't be doing this. It's not considered standard therapy. And it's not on his. When we joined, he had assigned group rules where it said that you're joining for 2 years, preferably a commitment. And before you leave, you have to give 6 to 8 weeks notice to, quote, allow people to say goodbye. And it was all relationship based. His group was about learning about relationships, so you shouldn't skip group because then you'll lose touch with momentum. You'll be like out of step with the group will move on. If you go on vacation, you have to give a warning. If you leave the group, you have to let people say goodbye. It was like supposedly teaching you about relationships that he was saying you can take outside the group, and he was saying everything inside the group is the same as outside the group. And he had this story that like the world would be a better place if everybody was open and honest about their feelings and thoughts, like he teaches in the group, and that's like official group therapy, and it would solve a lot of problems, and everything in the group is the same as outside of group. And he had this thing where it's like he was preventing you from quitting by saying like you have to give group notice to allow special sessions for the whole group to express their feelings about you leaving and to say their goodbyes. And he would also say when a person quit, he would say, well, people, it's a common phenomenon in the textbook that people regress to their previous self of how they were when they joined, at the time of quitting. He had all these like life advice and theories and explanations. And he would use Hollywood movies, and he would like explain things about women and people and relationships. It all sounded very profound. Like one person said like they want to find a guy to have children with despite their age. And he goes, well, having children isn't a logical decision. If you use logic, you'll never have children. And it seemed like totally legit, like a very smart thing to say. And people would kind of leave his group having this roller coaster of thrills, feeling bonded, like having this like cathartic, like outside of your body experience. It was like the highlight of their week. And he would give people a pep talk saying you could do anything. You could have sex with your hot neighbor, or like you could go out and meet someone. He just makes people feel desperate, people who were already lonely and who, had maybe some adverse childhood experiences or social problems or attention, intelligence problems or anxiety, depression. They just didn't understand what he was doing. Seems smart, but it isn't quite right. People in normal society don't do it. It's not appropriate for a therapist, and it's actually harmful because, and people reported it too, that when they tried being open and honest like he recommends, you get backlash. People they do it to don't like it. And even friends of mine, I told them I'm in this group that therapist is telling us to be open and honest. My friend said, well, obviously in real life you can't go around being open and honest with people because it takes them off guard. It's like way past the normal boundary that people operate in daily life. People don't like it. It's awkward. It's inappropriate. It's not gonna help. It's weird. It's not helpful. But I thought, no, they're wrong. He has a PhD. His method is wacky, but if you use it, you can like become more socially advanced, and it's a method of developing relationships. And he was like teaching to confront people. And like afterwards, people in his group like started having conflicts with parents, became abusive to their parents. Like one guy would just do like recreational drugs like weed with sort of strangers. And then he said, oh, therapist, I trusted you and you made me feel worse. And then he said he went out and he purposely injected heroin, even though he's never done it before. And then one person in the group quit her job, had conflicts with her mom, started saying her mom is annoying, invasive, and went to teach in China, which may have been a really bad move because, giving up a cushy job in America and then having a whole blank space in your resume where you're not in America and not doing anything relevant to your career, just working as a volunteer teacher, unless your career is teaching, which it wasn't for that person. It's kind of dangerous. The autistic girl who was clever, she never had a job. Her only job was in her dad's company, where people treated her really nicely, and she had a simple job. She was trying to get a job for years and couldn't. She decided to quit that job, even though it was very part-time, and she started having conflicts with her dad, who was her primary support system. He was rich and she lived in his house, and she did have some success dating online. And with the latest boyfriend, her boyfriends were actually seemed okay, online boyfriends. One guy was kind of an asshole, but nobody was like a criminal or a psychopath. Like our therapist, we figured out that this therapist was actually most likely a psychopath. Someone who should be in jail. Someone who doesn't do anything criminal, but someone who does things very unethically. she moved into a house with this online boyfriend, which may have been a good guy, actually. But this guy bought a house that his plan was to live in it and fix it up. And she moved into this house and quit her job, which she was only doing like 1 or 2 days a week, and quit the group. And I imagine she quit the group. Maybe her boyfriend said the group is weird, you should quit. I imagine that's probably what happened. But from my experience, a living renovation is really uncomfortable. Living in a house that needs repairs is uncomfortable, can be stressful. And living in a house in disrepair is stressful and unpleasant. It can be like a sacrifice, but you don't have to be a tough person with skills to tolerate it. And doing a living renovation is also very stressful and uncomfortable. And it may not be as easy as they imagine. So I don't know if moving into a house in disrepair was just it needs updating in an area that's not very not a criminal area, but kind of in the middle, not the best area of town. I don't know if it was a good idea. And then one person who was in this guy's group for 17 years of weekly sessions, that person was really mean to their mom and lived in squalor, didn't go to a gym even though wanted to, had a job but was kind of underemployed, and had these classy friends through family and work, but was kind of keeping the fact that their life was miserable a secret. It's almost like everyone in the group had some success, maybe with dating or jobs, but also had a lot of problems and kind of lost their support network, started alienating themselves. And we figured out that because this therapist, groomed us to violate our boundaries, to make us okay with him violating our boundaries. And he was using all the socially abusive ways of talking to someone: manipulation, demeaning, mocking, talking in third person, mirroring, lying, false promises, emotional appeals. I took a 2-week vacation this third month in group, and he called me on my personal cell phone saying, "Hey John, I just want to make sure you come back. I'm calling to see how you are, what you're up to. I want to make sure you come back because," quote, "the danger is that people quit group just as they're getting really good. Just as things are getting really good, people sometimes quit. And that's the danger." So it was an emotional appeal, which is an appropriate manipulation from a therapist. It was a false promise of things being good in his group, because most people became disillusioned, unhappy, and left because of that. They were glad to leave. They didn't believe in his group anymore. They started not to like him. And this supposed success of people becoming CEOs or achieving their career goals, getting married, relationship goals, supposedly that happened to the quote original members of the group, and this person who was for 17 years in his group. Everyone left, this person was still there. He made this person feel bad, saying this person was a dinosaur for being in his group so long. He was a loser didn't say loser, but just saying there's something wrong with them, saying, well, why are they still there? Why haven't they been able to move on? Saying they're a difficult case, they're resistant to him. And this person didn't pay his bill for 1.5 years, and he would discuss it in the group. This person would skip group sometimes, and he would write them an email and read his email to them in public in the group. And then this person would come back and he would make everyone in the group mad at them and lash out, call this person names, and he would say, oh, I remind this person of their father, and they have father issues, so they have to work their issues through them. They want to torture their father, so they're torturing me by not paying me, even though I'm doing good work and deserve to be paid. I haven't been paid for a year and a half, and we solve all problems in group. I'm too nice, and I'm enabling this person. They're resistant, and I shouldn't, and I'm involved and guilty of enabling them, but they're torturing me, and we have to work through this issue, and they're really resistant. And people would say they're mad at this person, why are they wasting group time? Why can't they just pay? But in reality, if a therapist sees and feels that the therapy can create financial problems for the patient, the therapist should discourage the therapy, advise them not to do it, in order not to encourage the person to go into financial trouble. And the fact that he let the person come for a year without paying their bill is kind of creating a dependence, enablement, and it's creating a financial problem. Can this person even afford it? This person supposedly had an inheritance coming that maybe they could, but this person is actually living paycheck to paycheck, to be honest. This person was living paycheck to paycheck, but they had a potential inheritance coming. They didn't know what it would be. So it wasn't very ethical. A person has been in your group for 17 years, and then we question why is this person still here? If it hasn't helped after 15 years, why come? And then he started saying, oh, this person can be in the group as much as they need to and want to be. It's their choice. But then other times he said this person is a loser for still being there and not being able to move on. What's wrong with them? They're a dinosaur. And actually there was a guy in the group who started heroin while in the group, who said that, hey, I told you I have insurance, and you implied that my insurance would cover it. You implied that my insurance would cover it, but my insurance doesn't cover you. So now, you encouraged me to join me. You encouraged me to join without confirming and finding out if my insurance covers you. And now, I'm unemployed. I got laid off, and now I have a huge bill from you. It's a financial problem. And the therapist goes, well, it's your responsibility to make sure if your insurance covers me. We just bill. We bill insurance, but your responsibility to make sure they cover you. But that's the therapist knows that for half the people, insurance doesn't cover him. And when they do, it's for 10 sessions only at a time. And he has to call them and get prior authorization. So he was misleading people by saying, oh yeah, we bill insurance, we take insurance. Even though he knows that more likely than not, the person insurance won't cover it. And the patient hasn't checked and isn't saying they will. A good therapist would say, call your insurance, make sure they cover me. Because half the time they don't, and you have to pay cash, or you can get prior authorization. If you do, keep in mind you might have to pay cash. He didn't say that, of course. He made the people believe that insurance might cover them. He didn't warn them, because he wanted the patient. The more patients, the better. And a person has a bill, they'll just pay cash. He doesn't care. And actually, I stopped billing my insurance because they started forcing him to call them, and I didn't want to burden him with it. It seemed cumbersome. I started paying cash, and in one group he says, well, John is a cash payer, praising me, giving me credit, quote unquote, for paying cash and not making him bill my insurance, which seemed manipulative. That's not in my interest to pay cash when my insurance might cover me if he can call them and do the authorization. And there was a lot of manipulative stuff like that. When I was gonna quit, I said, this group sucks, it doesn't seem to help. And he started mocking the word sucks, like, oh yeah, right, this group sucks, right? Well, and then he'd started playing victim, saying, well, John, this group is all I can offer to help people. That's all I can do. Like I'm supposed to feel bad for him that he can't do a better group, and I'm just supposed to accept his group because he has a need to be a therapist. Like I'm there for his needs, not my own. And then eventually, I was losing interest in the group because at first I thought I can't quit the group because of anxiety and depression. It's my support for that. But then I was noticing it doesn't really help with anxiety and depression. And when I skip group, I'm just fine. We all thought in the group, if we skip a week, that we wouldn't be able to handle life or something, or this was necessary for us. And people would verbalize surprise that they skipped a group and they were just fine. And when I skipped a group, I actually felt good. I was afraid to skip group. I would run away from family vacation in order to be with the group because I was so bonded to them, and I thought this would help me socialize. I viewed them as friends, even though they were all maladjusted people and not good friends, and they weren't very respectful to me. Some of them were nice, but a few of them actually started bullying me, mocking the way I talked, laughing at anything I said. And there was one guy who started saying that I don't belong in a group and I'm bad for it and I should be kicked out, which seemed like bullying. And then in order to keep me in the group, the therapist started saying that this person who was there for 17 years and me are, quote, the two key members, and the group's success, quote, depends on us making progress or not. So it's almost like he started making a little cult with seniority, calling this oldest member a senior member, due to them being longest in the group than anybody else, and making me very, quote unquote, important. He told me I don't have autism or Asperger's, or very little, and that, quote, I have horrible anxiety, and that, quote, I've built a lot of walls and defenses around myself and I have to drop my guard in order to make progress. But really he was doing malpractice, because I 100% have Asperger's and autism. I'm 100% neurodivergent, and he misled me, misdiagnosis, by telling me that I don't. And this whole drop your guard in order to make progress, while he's abusing, manipulating, emotionally abusing, misleading you, giving you bad advice, redirecting you when you have legitimate complaints about him, not telling you to quit the group when you say it harms you. That's all malpractice. And him saying you should drop your guard, it's just it's making you give him more information about yourself that he can then use to manipulate you to see what can he mirror, what can he misrepresent, how can he make you feel small, trauma bond you, what can he interest you with. It's he's saying, share more information with me to make group progress when you complain about him. And then he just uses that information to abuse you and bond you farther. And this actually really, he bonded you in a way, made you think you have to prove to him, made you think you have to explain to him that he is bad and why he is bad. You can't just turn around and leave and not think about him. He would just encourage you to talk. If you complain about him, it's to be he would encourage you to talk and made you believe you had a chance, or like you should explain to him why he is bad. But of course it went nowhere, and he just gaslighted you if you did, or just changed the subject. And then one day I just stopped coming to group, left him a voicemail saying, hey, you abused me for years, you probably mentally ill yourself, I withdraw my permission for you to contact me again. And then I met a person in the group, and the person in the group first said, like, met them at a train stop, and they said, oh, John, we were worried about you, we wondered where you went. And then I met them again, and they were like, are you guys like probably better in the group without me? And they're like, yeah, the group is like better without you there, finally we can have a good group. So I assume when the guy thought I might come back, he made it seem like, oh, I'm worried about John, what happened to him, like there's something wrong with him that he quit. Not that the therapist is a joke and a predator and illegally exploiting patients, harming patients, and that's why this person rightfully quit. It's like, this guy is helpful and so caring and kind, and this person is just struggling, and that's why they quit. This therapist was very charming and looked very kind and very proper, and went out of his way to like follow HIPAA rules and be like very professional, like a doctor and a professor. So it was really confusing. But now, like me and some former group members, we realized that this guy was most likely a psychopath. He had superficial charm, superficial empathy, was really good at reading people's thoughts and emotions superficially, but he didn't bond to people. He didn't actually care about people. And he said it himself that he's sadistic, and he just viewed people as like he has to manipulate them to make them long-term clients, and doesn't care which way. He's sort of like playing therapist because he thinks he should be, and knows he's a bad therapist, and sort of like laughing in his mind that people come to him, looks at patients as targets and like idiots for him to manipulate. But also at the same time, he's very grandiose. He thinks that he's the best therapist, says he's very special, that he can almost read people's minds, and he understands emotions unlike anybody else, and that he transforms lives if people stick with his group, and that he's an expert at group therapy, and he has been doing group therapy for 40 years, and now he's at the top of his career, and he devoted his life to helping people with group therapy, and he's also the smarter because due to his credentials he deserves a lot more money, but takes this reduced payment so he can help everyone. And he's very underpaid as a therapist, and insurance doesn't pay therapists enough. So it's like grandiose, and doesn't feel remorse, and actually has a drive to abuse and exploit people without them knowing, especially vulnerable people. Like he several times made jokes about a therapist exploiting a patient, nurses exploiting patients, and about exploiting the elderly. He encouraged one person in the group to be emotionally abusive to their grandparents. Like if grandparents come to you to help, like don't help them, send them elsewhere to do like group therapy with their neighbors. It's just bizarre. And he would like very cocky, self-assured, very happy with himself, give you this bad advice, like yes, he explained it to you, and then you'd say, well, your advice didn't work, and he would look down at you and like feel bad for you that you did it, and say he never told you that. Like he told one guy in the group on a blind date to ask the blind date, why is she being so aggressive? She's like inappropriate on a blind date because you don't know the person too well, and you shouldn't discuss them like that. he had these like tricks where he would like quote unquote teach us to have relationships with women, and one of the tricks was to tell women about themselves. He said that women don't care about men, they just care what men think of them. So if you tell the woman about herself and what you think about her, that's like the key. And now I see that like this therapist, here's my profile, psychological profile, probably genetically psychopath. So he doesn't bond with people normally. And like as a child, he sees, like a teenager, that everyone bonds, but he can't due to this neurological problem. So he like manipulates people using tricks so that the relationships he has with people's reactions mimic what it looks like in normal relationships, except people are being sort of honest, but he is just faking it in order to induce reactions in people. We also figured out that he's probably like a malignant narcissist, whatever that means, so destructive, gaslighting, blaming people. And the psychopath, I think this is what happened. He said that he was very much abused by 10 siblings. And he was part of the Catholic community. And so, like his dad ignored him, something like that. So I think that he was abused as a child and neglected in the family. And the way psychopathy supposedly develops is nobody communicates with the child, so the child goes around and starts manipulating people, almost like a wolf staying outside the flock of sheep, not being one of the sheep, but being like outside of the group and like manipulating the group instead of communicating with them in order to get his needs met. And these psychopaths, supposedly, they can really read your mind, and they really can read your emotions. They find that they figured out. I went online, and on Reddit, psychopaths said that like once they figured out how simple it is that people work, they were able to manipulate people easily, and that like they have people serve them. They have girlfriends and wives, but they just have their wives and girlfriends serve them. They're just really good liars, and they're really clever socially. They understand like social hierarchy and how things work socially. And our therapist, the group therapist, he had all these like clever things about social dynamics. Like he said, there's usually one key person who sets the agenda before the group. So if you want to find the agenda, you find that person and target them. So from his group, I learned psychopathy. He presented his own psychopathy as a series of life lessons to get through life. And he really thought that it wasn't just him. He thought that nobody's sincere, that everybody is like him, kind of like insincere and manipulative. And that he figured out the secrets to life using these psychopathy tricks. Also it said that psychopaths lead a parasitic lifestyle. So he was misleading and harming patients, but also pretending to be a therapist. Also giving some advice and therapy and life lessons, which was useful. And he was getting a small fee from each patient and just paying for his life in retirement this way. He sort of mentioned that he didn't see himself being able to work anybody else, that he had a degree in English and thought he couldn't get a job anywhere else. He had a weird thing saying the military is an amazingly great career, which the military is important for society, and it can be great for some people who it's a good fit, but you're isolated from society and this can be dangerous. So it's not great in many ways. It's not the military is not a great career in many ways. it's an important job for society. That's why people thank you for your service, because it's not a walk in the park. Yeah, so so he was like violating your boundaries. So we found that we became okay with people violating our boundaries, and we started like seeking out people who were like narcissists and psychopaths, and like triggering them to be their targets, like victims of their anger. And we also started violating other people's boundaries. And like one guy climbed into a girl's bed when he was at her house, and the girl was just a friend, and she was like pissed, what the fuck. He like convinced us that we should like violate boundaries, induce emotions, induce reactions, fake emotions, and abuse people as a way to like progress relationships, to have more relationships, like more mature relationships. Let's say you've never been on a date, or you want to be on a date with someone, and you like induce these things, like violate their boundaries, or like talk in this unnatural, abusive way, and he convinced you that this was how you build relationships and progress them forward. And everyone in my family started saying that, what you're learning in the group is inappropriate. This guy is showing red flags. The way you talk is inappropriate. When you are talking like you learned in the group, it's abusive, even abusive to children, abusive to the elderly. And I like didn't believe them. I brought it up to the therapist, saying, hey, my mom and my grandma hate you. And he goes, well, John, see, they're used to their old ways, but you are learning new and better ways, and they're just unhappy because they don't want things to change. But that was a lie. That wasn't the reality. It's like he twisted what might happen in good therapy by presenting that as happening in his bad therapy, his harmful, inappropriate, exploitative, abusive therapy, which wasn't healthy, supportive, respectful communication. It was bizarre, manipulative, and inappropriate, and abusive. And this effect from the group, like this rude, sadistic, abusive attitude, not truly normal, caring, I don't want to say loving, but just normally kind attitude, it just bounced like a tennis ball inside my family, and everyone kind of started going sour in my family. And it's like I almost can't stop. It's like anytime I have an obstacle, social obstacle or problem, it's like PTSD. I start repeating what this guy, quote unquote, taught me. And I've looked for therapists who can deprogram you. We figured out that this guy was using cult leader techniques and basically had a therapy cult, self-improvement cult, even though he was licensed. And I don't know if people have reported him. He had 0 online reviews. He would take piles of notes on a yellow pad during group, and we suspect maybe that was because so if he gets sued, he can just pull out those notes and say, oh, that's not what happened. Because I did report him. I didn't write my complaint very well. I kind of wrote the rant, and they just said, oh, we don't see abuse, we investigated. There was no actions for his license. He kept saying that he kept making this joke that he would die in his therapy chair, like this woman who inappropriately exploited a client by being elderly and having the client get therapy in her house in exchange for errands. And then one day the patient was really traumatized because during the therapy session, this female therapist passed away in front of them. Like they were talking and they realized this person is dead. And he thought it was funny and said, "Oh, no, 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 no. Of course it's not." But it's like he said it with like such pleasure, almost like he would got off on exploiting patients. He said he loves his job so much he will never retire. But guess what? During COVID, after I and others left him a lot of negative reviews, he sold his office and he retired. Supposedly he had some illness, but and it was like, well, the guy retired, so goes our group. Even though I was out for years at that point, it's like, and I saw someone from the group who had severe ADHD, and this person was the same as they joined, completely lost and inept. So the group didn't help them mature or become adapted to life or become more social. And actually, one of the reviews said that the person joined because they were hoping to save their marriage, but their marriage ended up in divorce anyway, and that they regret going inside the room ever because things got something changed. They had a bad gut feeling, and now they really regret making this guy their therapist, because after doing their group for a year, they ended up being more alienated and depressed, and that they attributed it to the guy's school of therapy to be out of date and old-fashioned. Another thing this therapist said, he would say like, oh, there's sexual attraction between family members in your family, like your cousin or mom or aunt, like they have Oedipus sexual desires towards you, or you are sexualizing your mom, or which could be true, but it's I don't know if saying that is helpful, speculative, or correct. It's just gonna mess with people's minds if he says that, because it's a very disturbing thing. If your therapist says that you're sexualizing your parent or your family members have sexual desires for you, that's a very strong statement. It's gonna mess with your mind. One time he declared that one of our friends is a jerk and we shouldn't talk about him in group. What else? Yeah, and he had this line he used on several patients where he said, you have father issues and you see me as your father, so you have to work your father issues through me. And he used this line on several patients, and it's just very devious. It bonds people to him while he is being abusive and inappropriate. They should just turn around, dump him, and not try to convince him that he is bad. Like, I don't even know if asking for a refund is worthwhile, because engaging in conversation just gives him more opportunities to draw you back in. And also when someone joined, he would nag them. Nagging, it's like when you're giving a compliment but actually putting the person down. So he started asking the person if they had a big house, and he was disappointed that this person's house was small, the family wasn't as rich as he expected. And then he started attacking this person's job, saying that this person's the client's dad, saying that the dad's job is bad and undesirable and he would hate it. And then he started comparing himself, saying that he loves his job as a therapist and he would hate to have your dad's job. So it's kind of putting you down. He started making fun of a person for being quote unquote nerd and wanting to be a computer programmer, saying oh, these professors are really good at their subject, but they can't tie their shoes. Do you want to be like that person? And when the person wanted to quit, he would encourage them to choose the group over college, which is bad advice, because the group was older people, maladjusted, not very successful people, and in college you just have so much better social influence than this group, plus career. And he started saying that this client is a narcissist, and started encouraging the group to say that why they think this person is a narcissist, and this person, he thinks he's better than the group, and that's why he's quitting. And he supposedly even falsely threatened to lock a patient in a psych ward during a one-on-one session where the patient wanted to quit, and he started saying like, oh, people like you end up in a psych ward, I can lock you up because you're a danger to yourself. And that's like misuse of authority, because the person wasn't a danger to himself, wasn't severely mentally ill, just had some anxiety and confusion developmentally, but maybe neurodivergence, but wasn't like a delusional, dangerous person. They weren't. And this therapist supposedly during the one-on-one session, when the person wanted to quit, just walked out of the room and then started doing his paperwork, like as giving the person a silent treatment for wanting to quit, because like implying that like it's good for the person to be in his therapy and in his group, and this person is like doing themselves a disservice, like making a bad decision. Like the therapist cares so much, he's like expressing it in such a strong way. But like giving somebody a silent treatment and like falsely threatening them with a psych ward institutionalization, that's abuse of power, and that's a toxic attitude that's harmful. So yeah, that was my culting. And what's surprising is that this therapist was licensed. He even had a clinical rotation for psychiatrists in medical school, psychiatry students, where they would sit in on one of his therapy sessions. Some of his reviews said that even other therapists came to him as patients for decades. One guy who said he's also a doctor or a therapist has come to him for help for 30 years, and they would say he's kind and he's like one of a kind and he helps people mature. And there was another therapist, woman, who's a nationally published author in therapy with good reviews for her book on Amazon, saying that she sends her patients to his groups and she gets consistent results from him. They become more mature, and she vouches for him. And supposedly she also like upsells her patients on like nutritionists and primary care and like coaches or whatever the patients need, for professionals supposedly personally confirmed by her. But like, what good is her confirmation if she selected this cult leader to refer people to? And this guy was actually married to a professor of therapy at a major university, also with a 40-year track record as an advocate for women's rights, for women's therapy, who has written articles and books and taught therapy students on how to be a therapist. So how could a nationally recognized expert in therapy and abuse, helping abused women, college professor with tenure, college professor of like therapy, psychology, be married to this guy who exploits and abuses patients and is like a psychopath himself, and a narcissist, malignant narcissist? We asked ourselves, how could this be? Supposedly psychopaths are really good at like sliding through the cracks and becoming successful and, you know, putting themselves in the right places. Like this guy would volunteer in professional organizations for therapists, host events, and even teach workshops. So, and then like behind closed doors, he was doing this personal abuse, and we checked with multiple professionals, and they all said what he was doing was not therapy, but was just some sort of personal abuse. But it wasn't therapy, and that this guy was just really good at getting away with it, making it look like therapy when it wasn't. And we actually read an essay published by his wife, the therapy professor, where she said that lifelong she has found herself around mentally disturbed people, even dangerous people, and she was like proud of herself for like remaining around these people and like adapting to them, quote unquote, safely. Like she found herself drawn to like mentally ill people. And so in our eyes, it makes sense, like this woman married this guy because he's mentally ill, like personality disorder, the narcissist, malignant narcissist, and a psychopath. And she feels comfortable in that kind of relationship, like people pleasing him, supporting him. And in her essays, she essentially admitted that she's so naive, like she doesn't bother to take herself out of unsafe situations with mentally ill people, but remains in them, which is almost like she's a professor of like trauma therapy. It's like she's almost admitting that all her life she was stuck in a trauma response, frozen, fawning, whatever, or feeling unnaturally at ease with people who are dangerous, where the recommended and the rational reaction would be to take yourself out of unsafe situations with mentally ill people and not to be around mentally ill people. It's like codependent or whatever. She's like, it's not good for you to be around someone dangerous and mentally ill. It's not safe and it's not good. It's good to be around healthy people. But she's almost using like this bad decision that's not in her interest as a source of like codependent pride. So yeah, it's just a complex situation. I got scammed. I had lifelong problems as a result of being in this group. I paid this guy $15,000 over 5 years for group sessions. And yeah, there's nothing you can do. We reported him, nothing happened. Just left him a bunch of online reviews. But now, at least we know a lot about cults and psychopaths. And it's almost like should be a checklist that a patient should bring to their new therapist or their new whatever, and just check off, these standard things that, exploitative, unethical people do.